It stalks the woods during the coldest and harshest months of the year, plagued with an insatiable hunger. Of immense size and speed, the Wendigo monster of Native American lore has become one of the most notorious flesh eaters of all time. The Wendigo legend teaches us about Native American spiritual beliefs and social values, and has three major symbolic interpretations: the incarnation of winter, the embodiment of hunger, and the personification of selfishness, both spiritual and physical. And then there's cannibalism. I'm Dr. Emily Zarka, and this is Monstrum. The Wendigo legend originates with indigenous people who belong to the Algonquian language family. They say it's a giant humanoid cannibal who can move at an incredibly fast speed. The Wendigo is astonishingly tall, with razor-sharp teeth and claws, and lips that are often chewed ragged or gone completely. They have a heart made of ice, and despite their unending hunger for human flesh, they remain emaciated. It shrieks and can run across treetops, and its presence may be preceded by a foul odor or a sudden snowstorm. Almost all Wendigos begin as humans, and once transformed, it has no gender. But how does one become a Wendigo? The most common way is by eating human flesh, but there are others, including dreaming of the Wendigo. It is also believed that you can become a Wendigo without physically transforming. Someone who is in a state of inner turmoil might be at risk of becoming one. Some communities believe it can be caused by spiritual imbalance, or by choosing to prioritize the self over the community. Since the lore of the Algonquian peoples is largely shared through oral tradition, there are several variations of the Wendigo. But the origins of the legend undoubtedly began with the indigenous tribes that lived in the northern woodlands, Atlantic coast, and Great Lakes regions. The Algonquian language family is one of the largest native linguistic groups in North America, and includes these groups, among others. Because of this widespread distribution, the Wendigo has many names, spellings, and pronunciations. There are more than 37 names for it that begin with W. Here we use the spelling that more accurately reflects the Cree and Ojibwe pronunciations, and the one that appears more commonly in indigenous authored texts. Regardless of how it's spelled, there is something that can help explain the Wendigo legend: climate and geography. All of the communities that share the Wendigo myth experience long, harsh winters. With heavy snowfall, freezing temperatures, and a lack of resources, the fear of starvation was a very real thing. This encourages people to stick together, both a practical and necessary means of survival. The Wendigo, on the other hand, thrives in the winter and can travel in blizzards. It hunts for those who are separated from the group or who leave the safety of their homes. The threat of cannibalism is embodied by the Wendigo. Fear is a powerful motivator, and this story spooked people into sharing food resources during the winter and preparing adequate food storages during the rest of the year. So, you wouldn't have to venture out into that blizzard and get eaten by a shrieking Wendigo. The Wendigo has appeared in another venue, the courtroom. In 1897, a Wendigo killing trial became a landmark case for early Canadian law when an Ojibwe man was found guilty of manslaughter for shooting someone he believed to be a Wendigo. In his culture, killing a Wendigo was acceptable, but his court conviction confirmed that Canadian common law applied to Indigenous communities, even if they had no knowledge of its existence. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a handful of other Indigenous people were similarly convicted of murder for killing people they deemed Wendigos. Like all monsters, we need to recognize the origins of the creature even as it continues to change and grow in other traditions. Whether it's a Hulk battling a Yeti-esque Wendigo in the woods, or finding the cure to tuberculosis in eating human flesh, greater significance and arguably enjoyment can be found by recognizing the creature's original purpose. The Wendigo is largely popular today because it represents a violation of a human code. Don't kill one another, and certainly don't eat them if you do. But it's more than that. The Wendigo is a warning about what could happen when an individual forgoes the collective for their own survival. The Wendigo is above all a lesson in excess and a manifestation of the anxieties that emerge in the harsh realities of winter, and how to survive it. Hint, don't eat other people.
Kent and I have been friends for many, many years. And around the end of the 1990s, I got to meet him. I was teaching at the Loft Literary Center in Minneapolis, and I asked my students, I always asked my students, to read a book, a first book, so that they could see where the bar was set. And I read Kent's book, Iron Lake. I was truly blown away. And I took the chance to see if he would come and talk to the students, which he did. And that is how we first met, right, Kent?
I remember it well, Ellen.
I mean, let's dive into Iron Lake and into your thinking about writing Iron Lake. They loved the book, but they did not like something that you did in the book, and that was kill off a very important and a character that we loved.
Oh, she was the sweetest character in the whole book.
She was. Why did you do that?
Because I'm heartless.
You're mean.
So here's the deal, and this is what I explained to your students. Let me talk first about the death of Molly Nurmi, how that happened.
Okay.
So this was my first novel in the mystery genre, and I had done a lot of reading of mysteries, and one of the tropes of a mystery novel is that the protagonist's love interest is put in jeopardy. And it's up to the protagonist to save him or her. So as I was writing Iron Lake, I knew Molly was going to be in danger, and I just needed to come up with a way for Cork to save her. So I got to the point where Molly is in jeopardy. I'm writing every day at the St. Clair Broiler, 6 o'clock every morning.
Right.
I'm going there morning after morning now, trying to write this scene where Cork saves Molly, and it's just not happening. And finally, I sat back, Ellen, and I asked myself, is that because Cork doesn't save her? And I went to the broiler the next day, and I said to myself, I'm going to write this scene however it plays out is the way it's supposed to be. And I wrote the scene in which Molly dies on the ice. Now, while I was writing that scene, the waitress who always poured me my coffee came and she put her hand on my shoulder and she said, Kent, are you okay? Because there were tears streaming down my cheek. It hurt to kill Molly. But it did so much for that book and so much for the series. And here's what it did. Killing Molly made that book more than just a beach read.
Yeah.
Because readers, if I'd done my job correctly, were emotionally invested in Molly, and her death had an emotional impact on them that a beach read doesn't.
Sure.
It also motivated Cork to go through the rest of the book and do what he had to do in order to, fix the situation. But here is what happened in the long run. Readers who when you have a central protagonist at the heart of the series, you don't get a lot of distance when you put that character in jeopardy, because the astute reader knows that you're going to pull his or her ass out of the fire at some point. That character has to be in the next novel. But readers who have read Iron Lake and know that I killed Molly understand that although Cork is safe, anybody else I put in jeopardy might not make it to the end of the book. And that's where the real suspense comes from. So it just helped me establish in a reader's mind that they can't predict what I'm going to do, I typically write stories in which Cork's ethos is front and center. He's a guy who's, he's just a regular guy. He's always trying to do the right thing. He's always seeking justice. Doesn't always get there, doesn't always make the right decisions, but he's really trying. But I have, in a couple of my novels, had Cork cross the line and leave justice essentially behind, because there were compelling reasons to do that. And I do have to admit that I like mysteries that have some moral complexity to them. You have to ask yourself, in this situation, what would I do? What would really be right here?
Right.
Justice isn't always necessarily about the law.
Right. Very well put. Very well put.
For those of you who don't know this, Ellen and I traveled for years and years and years probably a dozen years together with another mystery author here in Minnesota, a guy named Carl Brookins. We called ourselves the Minnesota Crime Wave, and we appeared in libraries and bookstores, and we did national tours. We had a television show for a while.
We had
Uh,
fun.
oh, did we ever have fun? Did we ever have fun?
There are a number of people who want to know what your radical activities were.
Okay, I'm willing to. It's another story that I enjoy telling. Shall I do that? Shall I take a little bit of time?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I was at Stanford University. I matriculated in the fall of 1969. This was deep in the Vietnam War. And for those of you who are old enough to remember, you may remember that the spring of 1970 was the spring in which the shootings on the Kent State campus took place. It was when we learned that not only were we carrying on a war in Vietnam, we were also carrying on a secret war in Cambodia and in Laos. Stanford University had a relationship at that point in time with an organization, a business called SRI, Stanford Research Institute, whose primary source of income, at least at that point in time, was research into military weaponry. There were a lot of us at Stanford that felt that that was an inappropriate relationship for an institution like Stanford to maintain, particularly at that point in history. And so we petitioned the Board of Trustees to sever the relationship. We petitioned the administration. We marched, we demonstrated, and nobody listened to us because, of course, there were enormous sums of money involved. So finally, in frustration, a group of us one day walked into the administration building and occupied it. The president of the university, a guy named Richard Lyman, said, fine. He was very reasonable, said, fine, I'm not going to give you any problem. He vacated the building and we took it over. That night we had a dance where typically students would have registered for the classes in the building. And we had a band come in. And about midnight, the band packed up and took off. And those of us who were going to occupy the building rolled out our sleeping bags and went to sleep. Huge tactical error.
Yeah.
At 1 a.m., the Palo Alto riot squad swept through and arrested us all. I was on a full scholarship. The scholarship evaporated and I had to leave Stanford. So that's my story.
Yeah. I'm also looking at the questions here because I want to get to some of those. There are a lot of questions about why you chose to make Cork half Native American. Is it half Native American?
It's actually 1/4 Native.
1/4 Native American. Yeah. Okay. I thought I was wrong. So why the Ojibwe element?
Sure. When I decided that one of the very early decisions I made about what I was going to write was that I was going to set my work up north.
Sure.
In just the beautiful Great North Woods, the Arrowhead, really. When I took a really good look at the North Country, I realized you can't write a true story set in the North Country without including the Anishinaabe people as an element of the work, because their influence up there is ubiquitous. It's everywhere and it's powerful. So I decided I was going to include the Ojibwe in what I wrote. Now, here you go, fiction writing 101. You know that what every fiction writer is looking for is conflict. It's conflict that drives great stories. What is it that drives Romeo and Juliet? It's the conflict between the Montagues and the Capulets, those two powerful families in which our star-crossed lovers find themselves caught. Moby Dick, Ahab and that white whale, conflict, conflict, conflict. So when I looked up north, that's what I saw was conflict. Conflict in that rugged landscape, conflict in the weather, conflict in the cultures, particularly who were trying to live together up there and often not doing a good job of it. So I thought, what if I created a character who, in who he was, could mirror the conflict of those two cultures, white and native? So I decided I was going to make Cork part native.
Well, that makes sense. Did Hillerman enter in, was he at all instrumental in what you were doing, or did you not? Did you read Tony Hillerman?
Yeah, I did. When I decided I was going to write mysteries instead of the great American novel, and really had to bone up on mysteries. What does it take to write a mystery? I discovered Tony Hillerman's work very early on, and was just amazed at how flawlessly, seamlessly, he was able to weave that interesting cultural information about the Navajo, the Dene, into his stories. And, I knew nobody was doing that at that point in time, at any rate, with Ojibwe here in Minnesota. And so that certainly influenced my decision.
Okay.
I have to tell you, when he walked into the series out of that snowstorm, I had no idea that he was going to do that. I had no idea who this guy was when I wrote that scene.
Walk-ons are magic.
Yeah, that is part of the magic of being a storyteller. I had no idea the part he was going to ultimately play in the series. I mean, Henry the Malou is the favorite character of so many of my readers, and I have to admit, I look forward tremendously to writing the scenes in which Henry plays a part, because I don't have to revise those scenes. Whatever Henry says is exactly what Henry ought to say. And you just said the right word, magic. There's so much about storytelling that feels like magic.
There are a number of people who want to know who your favorite authors are. You want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Rather than favorite authors, I have favorite books.
Oh, okay.
But I will say, I do have recently have a favorite author, a guy named Frederick Bachman. Most of you folks out there may know him as the author of A Man Called Ove. He is a Scandinavian author, and I've read every one of his books. I look forward to them coming out because he's so compassionate in the way he approaches his characters. I just love the heart in his books, and he's just a fine writer. So Frederick Bachman is really one of my favorites these days. But rather than favorite authors, typically I have favorite books, and probably everybody out there does. To Kill a Mockingbird is my all-time favorite book, and I reread that about every other year. I love Catcher in the Rye. I love Minnesota's own F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. I try to go back to the classics when I'm looking for something to reread my favorite books.
My name is William Kent Krueger, and I'm a liar.
My name is Ellen Hart, and I'm a liar.
My name is Carl Brookins, and I'm a liar.
We're mystery writers. We're the Minnesota Crime Wave, and every week you can find us here on CTV 15, spinning our tales, discussing the crime genre, and interviewing intriguing guests. The show is called The Minnesota Crime Wave Presents. We'd love to have you tune us in, and that's no lie.